Before you hear about empires falling and men freezing to death in the snow, let me ask you something. What does it take to destroy the most powerful army Europe has ever assembled? Not a bigger army. Not better generals. Sometimes, all it takes is distance, cold, and time. If you're here for the real story, no fluff, no Hollywood myths, just the decisions, the suffering, and the collapse, then you're in the right place. Hit that like button right now, drop a comment if you've heard the name Borodino before, and subscribe because we're diving into one of history's darkest military disasters. This is the story of how Napoleon Bonaparte marched 685,000 men into Russia in 1812, and watched almost all of them die. Let's go back to June 1812. Napoleon stands at the peak of his power. He controls most of Europe. Spain, Italy, the German states, the Low Countries, they all bend to his will. The old monarchies fear him. The revolutionaries admire him. He's redrawn borders, rewritten laws, crowned himself emperor. He's beaten Austria multiple times, crushed Prussia, humiliated Russia at Friedland. The continent has never seen anyone like him. But there's a problem. Russia won't stay in line. Tsar Alexander I signed a treaty with Napoleon after the Battle of Friedland in 1807, the Treaty of Tilsit. It was supposed to keep the peace, lock Russia into Napoleon's continental system, cut off trade with Britain. But Alexander isn't following the rules. Russian merchants keep trading with the British. The Tsar ignores French demands. Worse, he's mobilizing troops near the border. Napoleon sees betrayal. He sees defiance. And he won't tolerate it. So Napoleon decides to do what he does best, invade. But this won't be like his other campaigns. This will be the largest military force Europe has ever seen. He pulls soldiers from across his empire. Frenchmen, Germans, Poles, Italians, Dutch, Austrians, 685,000 men in total. The Grande Armée. La Grande Armée. It stretches for miles when it marches. Supply wagons, artillery trains, cavalry columns, infantry divisions. The logistics alone are staggering. Feeding this many men, keeping them equipped, moving them across hostile terrain, it's never been attempted on this scale. Napoleon's plan is simple. Cross into Russia. Force a decisive battle. Crush the Russian army. March to Moscow. Dictate terms to Alexander. Go home before winter. Standard Napoleonic warfare, fast, brutal, decisive. He expects the Russians to meet him near the border, fight, and lose. He's done it before. On June 24, 1812, the Grand Army crosses the Neman River into Russian territory. The invasion begins. The soldiers are confident. They've followed Napoleon to victory after victory. They believe in him. They believe in themselves. They have no idea what's coming. Here's the thing. Russia doesn't fight like everyone else. The Russian commanders, Barclay de Tolly and Prince Bagration, know they can't beat Napoleon in a straight fight. The French are too experienced, too well-drilled, too aggressive. So they do something unexpected. They retreat. Not in panic. Not in defeat. Strategically. They pull back, deeper into Russia, refusing to give Napoleon the battle he craves. And as they retreat, they burn everything. Crops, villages, bridges, food stores, anything the French could use. The policy is called scorched earth, and it's ruthless. Russian peasants watch their homes go up in flames. But the army doesn't stop. If the French want to chase them, they'll have to do it through ash and ruin. Napoleon is furious. He needs that decisive battle. His entire strategy depends on it. He pushes his men forward, trying to catch the Russians, trying to force them to stand and fight. But the distances are insane. Russia is vast, far larger than anything Napoleon has conquered before. The roads are dirt tracks that turn to mud in the rain. The heat is suffocating. Soldiers march 20, 30 miles a day. Horses collapse. Supply wagons break down. Men start falling out of formation, exhausted, dehydrated, sick. The food runs out faster than expected. The supply lines stretch thinner and thinner. The Grand Army was supposed to live off the land, but there's nothing left to take. The Russians burned it all. Soldiers start slaughtering their horses for meat. Then they start dying: dysentery, typhus, starvation. Thousands of men drop before they ever see a Russian soldier. Napoleon keeps pushing. He has to. Turning back now would be humiliation. His empire is built on victory, on momentum, on the myth of his invincibility. If he retreats without fighting, that myth shatters. So he drives his men deeper into Russia, chasing ghosts. Weeks pass. The Grand Army shrinks. Not from battle, from attrition. By the time they reach Smolensk in August, they've lost over 150,000 men. Smolensk is burning when they arrive. The Russians torched it before retreating again. Napoleon stands in the smoking ruins and realizes the campaign isn't going according to plan. But he's come too far to stop now. His marshals are worried. They're veterans: Ney, Davout, Murat. They've seen Napoleon pull off miracles, but this feels different. The army is exhausted. The men are hungry. Winter is coming. They urge him to stop, consolidate, wait until spring. Napoleon refuses. Moscow is only a few weeks away. If he can take Moscow, he can force Alexander to negotiate. The capital of Russia, it has to mean something. The Russians finally stop retreating. On September 7, 1812, the two armies meet at a village called Borodino, 70 miles west of Moscow. This is it. The battle Napoleon has been chasing for 3 months. The bloodiest single day of the Napoleonic Wars. The Russian commander is now Mikhail Kutuzov, an old, cautious general who has replaced Barclay. Kutuzov doesn't want to fight, but the Tsar demands it. The Russian people demand it. So Kutuzov picks his ground, a ridge near Borodino, anchored by fortifications called flèches and a central strongpoint, the Great Redoubt. He has about 120,000 men. Napoleon has slightly more. The stage is set. The battle begins at dawn. Napoleon orders a frontal assault. No clever maneuvers, no flanking brilliance, just raw, grinding violence. French artillery pounds the Russian positions. Infantry charges uphill into cannon fire and musket volleys. The flèches change hands multiple times. Men fight with bayonets in the trenches. The Great Redoubt becomes a slaughterhouse. French cavalry charges are torn apart by Russian guns. Russian counterattacks are shattered by French firepower. It goes on for 12 hours. The noise is deafening: thousands of cannons, muskets, men screaming. The smoke is so thick you can barely see. Bodies pile up. Blood soaks into the ground. By the end of the day, 70,000 men are dead or wounded. 70,000. In one day. On one battlefield. The Russians withdraw overnight, but they're not destroyed. They retreat in order, still an army, still dangerous. Napoleon claims victory: he held the field, after all. But it doesn't feel like victory. His men are shattered. His marshals are shaken. And the Russians are still out there, still retreating, still burning everything. A week later, Napoleon reaches Moscow. The city is almost empty. The governor, Fyodor Rostophin, evacuated the population. And then, within hours of the French arrival, Moscow starts burning. Fires break out across the city, deliberate, coordinated. The Russians are burning their own capital rather than let Napoleon have it intact. Napoleon watches Moscow burn from the Kremlin. 3/4 of the city goes up in flames. The wooden buildings, the markets, the supplies he desperately needed, all ash. He expected triumph. He expected Alexander to come begging for peace. Instead, he gets silence and smoke. He waits. Days turn into weeks. He sends letters to Alexander, offering peace, offering terms. No response. The Tsar won't negotiate. Napoleon realizes, too late, that taking Moscow means nothing. Russia is too big. Its rulers are willing to sacrifice anything. And winter is coming. By mid-October, Napoleon knows he has to retreat. He's 500 miles deep in hostile territory. His army is starving. The horses are dying. The Russians are circling like wolves, harassing his supply lines, ambushing stragglers. If he waits any longer, he'll be trapped. On October 19, 1812, the Grand Army begins its retreat from Moscow. 100,000 men start the march. Behind them, the city still smolders. Ahead of them, nothing but cold, hunger, and death. This is where the nightmare truly begins. The retreat starts in eerie silence. 100,000 men, what's left of the Grand Army, march out of Moscow in long, exhausted columns. The first week isn't terrible. Cold, yes, but manageable. The men are tired, hungry, demoralized, but still moving. Napoleon plans to take a southern route back, through fresh territory the army hasn't already stripped bare. But the Russians have other plans. Kutuzov's army shadows them, staying parallel, just out of reach. Cossack raiders hit the flanks constantly, screaming out of the trees, cutting down stragglers, stealing supplies, vanishing before the French can respond. It's psychological warfare. The French soldiers start glancing over their shoulders. They bunch closer together. Nobody wants to be at the edge of the column. Then Napoleon gets bad news. The southern route is blocked. A Russian force is dug in, waiting. He has no choice. He has to take the same road back that he came in on. The road through Smolensk. The road that's already been picked clean. The road that's littered with corpses from the march in. Now the temperature drops. Early November, and winter arrives ahead of schedule. It's not the brutal, apocalyptic cold yet, that's coming, but it's cold enough. Men who don't have proper coats start shivering uncontrollably. Fires become desperate necessities. Soldiers burn anything they can find, furniture from abandoned villages, wagon wheels, even books. They huddle around the flames at night, too exhausted to care about discipline. The food situation is catastrophic. There's nothing left. The scorched earth policy worked. The Grand Army is walking through a wasteland. Soldiers eat their horses, first the sick ones, then the healthy ones, then the cavalry mounts. The once proud French cuirassiers, the heavy cavalry that dominated European battlefields, are walking now. Without horses, they're just men in metal coats. Starvation does strange things. Men stop talking. They stop caring about ranks, about orders, about anything except the next meal. Units disintegrate. Officers lose control. Soldiers wander off the road, searching for food in the ruins of burned villages, and never come back. Some are killed by Cossacks. Some freeze. Some just sit down and wait to die. Napoleon tries to maintain order, but it's slipping through his fingers. This isn't an army anymore. It's a refugee column. 10,000 men, 20,000 men peel away from the main body every week. Dead, captured, deserted, lost. The column gets shorter. The pace slows. The desperation grows. Then, in mid-November, the real cold hits. -20 degrees Celsius. -30. The kind of cold that makes your lungs burn when you breathe. The kind that freezes your sweat to your skin. The kind that kills. Men start dying in huge numbers. Frostbite takes fingers, toes, noses, ears. Soldiers wake up and can't feel their feet. They keep walking anyway because stopping means death. Some collapse mid-step and never get up. The road becomes a corridor of frozen corpses. Thousands of them. Bodies in French uniforms, bodies in Polish uniforms, bodies with no uniforms at all, stripped by the desperate living. The corpses don't rot. They just freeze solid, monuments to failure. Horses die by the thousands. The French started the campaign with nearly 200,000 horses. Now they're almost gone. When a horse collapses, men swarm it, hacking off chunks of meat with bayonets and knives, sometimes before it's fully dead. They eat it raw because there's no time to cook. The blood freezes on their hands. The wagons are abandoned. The artillery, Napoleon's favorite weapon, the guns that won him battles from Italy to Egypt to Austerlitz, left in the snow. Too heavy. No horses to pull them. The men are too weak to drag them. So they're spiked and left behind. The Russians collect them later, hundreds of French cannons, a fortune in bronze and iron. Discipline is gone. Soldiers ignore their officers. They throw away their muskets because the metal is too cold to hold. They discard their packs to move faster. They loot the baggage train, fighting each other for scraps of food, for blankets, for anything that might keep them alive one more day. It's every man for himself now. The Cossacks keep coming. They don't even fight most of the time, they just watch, circling the column like vultures. When someone falls behind, they ride in, strip the body, and ride away. Sometimes they take prisoners. The French fear capture almost as much as freezing. Russian peasants, furious at the invasion, at the destruction, exact brutal revenge on captured Frenchmen. Stories spread through the column, men burned alive, buried alive, beaten to death. Whether they're all true doesn't matter. The fear is real. By late November, the Grande Armée reaches the Berezina River. This is the crisis point. The river is supposed to be frozen solid, crossable on foot. But there's been a thaw. The ice is broken up, slushy, unstable. The river is flowing, freezing cold, and there's no bridge. And the Russians are closing in. 3 separate Russian armies are converging on the Berezina, trying to trap Napoleon and destroy what's left of his force. If the French can't cross, they're finished. Kutuzov knows it. Admiral Pavel Shishagov, commanding one of the Russian armies, knows it. They're moving fast, trying to seal the trap. Napoleon orders his engineers to build bridges. 2 bridges, side by side, across the Berezina near the town of Studianka. The engineers, freezing, exhausted, wade into the icy water. Some of them die from exposure while working. But they keep building. Timber torn from nearby buildings, whatever they can find. It takes 2 days. 2 desperate, freezing days while the Russians close in. On November 26th, the bridges are ready. Narrow, rickety, but standing. The crossing begins. Infantry first, then cavalry, then the baggage train, then the stragglers. It's chaos. Everyone is desperate to get across. Men shove each other. Officers scream orders that no one follows. The bridges sway under the weight. The Russians arrive. Artillery opens fire. Shells slam into the riverbanks. Men die before they reach the bridge. Men die on the bridge. Men fall into the freezing water and drown or die from hypothermia in minutes. The sound is hellish. Cannon fire, screaming, the crack of breaking wood, the roar of the river. Napoleon's rearguard, commanded by Marshal Ney, fights a desperate holding action. Ney is a legend. The bravest of the brave, Napoleon calls him. His men are outnumbered, outgunned, frozen, starving. But they hold. They buy time for the main body to cross. Ney himself is one of the last men across, fighting off Russian cavalry with a musket he picked up from a dead soldier. The bridges collapse on November 29th. Thousands of stragglers are still on the wrong side. They rush the riverbank in panic. Some try to swim. They don't make it. Some try to cross on the broken ice. It gives way. The Cossacks ride in and cut them down or take them prisoner. 10,000 men are lost at the Berezina. Maybe more. Nobody knows exactly. But Napoleon gets across. So does the core of his army. Maybe 40,000 combat-effective soldiers, plus thousands of unarmed, broken stragglers. They keep moving west. The Russians keep following. The cold keeps killing. December arrives. The temperature drops even further. -40 degrees. Men are dying so fast the survivors stop counting. They stop burying the dead, too frozen, too tired. The corpses just line the road, frozen in the positions they died in. Some sitting. Some kneeling. Some sprawled in the snow. Their faces are locked in expressions of agony or exhaustion or blank nothingness. Entire units vanish. The Italian corps, the Westphalian regiments, the proud Polish lancers, gone. Dead, captured, scattered. The multinational empire that Napoleon built, the soldiers who followed him from Madrid to Moscow, they're dying in the snow, forgotten. Napoleon himself is struggling. He's still moving, still giving orders, but the myth is crumbling. The invincible emperor is just a man now, wrapped in furs, walking through the freezing darkness like everyone else. His marshals are hollow-eyed. His imperial guard, the elite veterans who never broke, they're breaking now. On December 5th, Napoleon makes a decision. He's going to leave. Not retreat with the army, leave ahead of it, race back to Paris. Why? Because news is reaching him that Paris is restless, that rumors of disaster are spreading, that his enemies smell blood. If he stays with the army, he'll be trapped in the slow crawl west, maybe captured, maybe killed. If he loses control of Paris, he loses everything. So he tells his marshals he's going. He puts Murat in command of what's left of the Grande Armée. He takes a small escort, gets in a sleigh, and rides west as fast as the horses can pull him. He leaves his men behind. Some call it abandonment. Others call it pragmatism. Either way, Napoleon is gone. The army keeps dying. Mid-December, 1812. The Grande Armée, or what's left of it, stumbles toward the Russian border. The cold is unrelenting. The Cossacks are unrelenting. Death is unrelenting. Marshal Murat, now in command, is barely holding it together. He's a cavalry genius, a flamboyant warrior who once charged into enemy lines wearing a feathered hat and gold-braided uniform. Now he's just trying to keep men moving. The soldiers are unrecognizable. Their uniforms are rags. Their faces are blackened by frostbite. Their eyes are sunken, dull. They look like walking corpses. Some have wrapped their feet in cloth because their boots disintegrated. Some have no coats, just blankets tied around their shoulders. They shuffle forward in silence, too tired to talk, too cold to feel. The French cross into Poland in late December. Poland, Napoleon's ally, the nation he restored, the people who sent 100,000 men to fight for him in Russia. The Poles look at the survivors and barely recognize them. Where are the others? Where are the Polish regiments? The answer is simple: dead. Frozen in the Russian snow. The few Polish survivors who make it back are shattered, traumatized. The dream of a free Poland, restored by Napoleonic victory, is dying with them. The numbers are staggering. Napoleon invaded Russia with 685,000 men. When the remnants finally stagger across the border in January 1813, fewer than 40,000 are still combat-capable. That's less than 6%. 6% survival rate. The rest are dead, captured, deserted, or so broken they'll never fight again. It's the worst military disaster in European history up to that point. But it's not just the soldiers. The horses, nearly 200,000 of them, are almost all dead. The artillery, over 1,000 cannons, lost. The supply train, destroyed. The prestige, shattered. Napoleon built his empire on the myth of invincibility. After Russia, that myth is dead. The other European powers notice. Austria, Prussia, Sweden, they've been beaten by Napoleon before, humiliated, forced into alliances they hated. Now they see weakness. They see opportunity. Within months, they'll turn on him. The Sixth Coalition will form: Russia, Prussia, Austria, Britain, Sweden, Spain, all aligned against France. Napoleon will fight on for 2 more years, winning battles, losing wars, until finally, in 1814, they force him to abdicate and exile him to Elba. He'll escape, return for the 100 Days, lose at Waterloo, and end his life on a remote island in the South Atlantic, a prisoner of the British. But it all starts here. In the snow. On the long, frozen road from Moscow. Let's talk about why this happened. How does the greatest general of his era, commanding the largest army Europe has ever seen, lose so completely? First, logistics. Napoleon underestimated the scale. Russia is massive. The distances are insane. His supply lines stretched over 500 miles from the Neman River to Moscow, keeping 685,000 men fed, armed, and equipped over that distance, through hostile territory, with the Russians burning everything. It was impossible. He knew it was risky. He did it anyway. Arrogance? Maybe. Overconfidence in his ability to force a quick, decisive battle? Definitely. Second, scorched earth. The Russians refused to play by the rules. European warfare in this era was about battles. Big, set-piece confrontations where armies met, fought, and one side won. The Russians didn't do that. They retreated, burned, retreated, burned. They traded space for time. They let the land itself become their weapon. Napoleon had no answer for that. He couldn't force them to fight, and he couldn't survive in the wasteland they left behind. Third, attrition. The Grande Armée was dying before winter even arrived. Disease, hunger, exhaustion, heat. By the time they reached Moscow, they'd lost over 200,000 men. They'd marched themselves to death. The retreat finished the job, but the collapse started long before the cold hit. Fourth, winter. Yes, the cold killed tens of thousands. But it wasn't just bad luck. It was late October when Napoleon started retreating. He knew winter was coming. He gambled that he could get out before it hit hard. He was wrong. And once the real cold arrived, the army was doomed. Men froze because they were already weak, already starving, already broken. Fifth, Russian strategy. Kutuzov, Barclay, Alexander, they didn't need to destroy Napoleon's army themselves. They just needed to avoid losing while the land did the work. Harass, delay, burn, retreat. Let hunger and cold do the killing. It worked. The Russians lost hundreds of thousands of men too, soldiers and civilians, burned villages, scorched farmland. But they were willing to pay that price. Napoleon wasn't. And finally, hubris. Napoleon believed he could bend Russia to his will because he'd bent everyone else. He believed his genius, his speed, his aggression would overcome the obstacles. He believed Moscow mattered. He was wrong. Russia didn't care about Moscow. Russia cared about survival. And in the end, survival meant outlasting the invader. Let's talk about the human cost. 685,000 men marched into Russia. Fewer than 40,000 came back combat-ready. That means roughly 645,000 men are dead, captured, or too broken to fight. Most of them are dead. Frozen, starved, shot, drowned, diseased. Their bodies are scattered across 1,000 miles of Russian and Polish countryside. Some are buried. Most aren't. 4 years afterward, travelers on those roads report seeing bones in the ditches, scraps of uniform in the bushes, skulls grinning from the snowmelt. Think about the villages they came from. Small towns in France, in Germany, in Poland, in Italy. Families waiting for sons and fathers who will never return. Some get letters. Most don't. The men just disappear into the Russian vastness and never come home. Entire regiments are wiped out. Local communities lose a generation of young men. The Russian cost is just as brutal. The scorched earth policy devastated their own people. Thousands of Russian peasants starved because their crops were burned. Thousands more froze or were killed by French stragglers or died in the fighting. Moscow, their ancient capital, was 3/4 destroyed. Smolensk, Vitebsk, dozens of towns, burned to the ground. The Russian army lost over 200,000 men in the campaign. They won. But they bled for it. And what did it accomplish? Napoleon's empire begins its collapse. The wars that started in 1792, when revolutionary France declared war on Austria, won't end until 1815 at Waterloo. 23 years of near-constant warfare. Millions dead. And after all that blood, after all those battles, after Napoleon reshapes Europe twice, the Bourbon monarchy is restored in France. The old kings come back. The map looks almost like it did before the revolution. Was it worth it? You could argue Napoleon brought reforms, the Napoleonic Code, meritocracy, the end of feudal privileges in conquered territories. You could argue he spread Enlightenment ideals across Europe. But you could also argue he was a tyrant who caused untold suffering in pursuit of personal glory. History has few clean answers. What we know for certain is this. In 1812, 685,000 men marched into Russia. Fewer than 40,000 came back. It's one of the darkest chapters in military history. A masterclass in overreach. A testament to the limits of genius. A reminder that geography, climate, and logistics can defeat even the greatest armies. Napoleon sits in his sleigh, racing back to Paris, leaving his frozen, dying soldiers behind. He'll rebuild. He'll raise new armies. He'll fight again. But the Grand Army, the magnificent, invincible Grand Army that terrorized Europe for a decade, it's gone. Dead in the Russian snow. If this story moved you, if you learned something, if you want more history without the fluff, just the facts, the suffering, and the consequences, then here's what I need. Hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below. Have you heard of Borodino? Did you know the Berezina crossing? Let's build a community that respects history, that honors the dead, that doesn't look away from the brutal truth. Because this isn't just a story about Napoleon. It's a story about hubris. About the price of ambition. About what happens when empires overreach. And it's a story that echoes through history, from Russia in 1812, to Russia in 1941 when Hitler makes the same mistake, to every war where distance, cold, and stubbornness defeat invasion. 685,000 men entered Russia. Fewer than 40,000 returned. Remember them. Remember what they endured. Remember what it cost. That's the story. That's the truth. No fluff. Just history. Let's rewind. Before we talk about what went wrong, let's talk about what Napoleon was thinking. Because this wasn't a reckless gamble by a desperate man. This was a calculated invasion by the most successful military commander since Julius Caesar. Napoleon had reasons. He had a plan. And for a while, it almost made sense. The year is 1811. Napoleon controls an empire that stretches from Spain to Poland, from the North Sea to southern Italy. He's beaten every major continental power, Austria 4 times, Prussia once so badly they still haven't recovered, Russia at Friedland in 1807. The Treaty of Tilsit, signed on a raft in the middle of the Neman River, was supposed to lock Russia into his orbit. Alexander agreed to join the continental system, Napoleon's economic blockade against Britain. No Russian ports for British ships. No Russian trade with London. Strangle Britain economically, and Napoleon wins without invading across the Channel. But Alexander isn't keeping his word. By 1810, Russian ports are secretly trading with Britain again. Russian merchants are making fortunes breaking the blockade. The Tsar issues decrees that look like compliance but do nothing in practice. Napoleon knows this. His spies report it. His customs officials document it. It's a betrayal, and worse, it's making him look weak. There's more. Russia is expanding its influence in Poland, in the Ottoman territories, in areas Napoleon considers his sphere. The Tsar is rearming, reorganizing his military, moving troops toward the border. From Napoleon's perspective, war is inevitable. Better to strike first, strike hard, and force Alexander back to the table before Russia becomes a bigger threat. So Napoleon starts planning. This won't be like his other campaigns, lightning strikes, rapid marches, one decisive battle. Russia is too big for that. He'll need a massive force, overwhelming numbers, enough men to absorb losses and keep pushing. He starts pulling troops from across the empire. The French Grande Armée forms the core, experienced, disciplined, loyal. But Napoleon needs more. He calls on his allies. The Germans, Bavarians, Saxons, Westphalians, troops from the Confederation of the Rhine. The Poles, desperate to restore their nation, willing to fight Russia, their historic oppressor. The Italians. The Dutch. Even the Austrians and Prussians, defeated enemies forced into alliance, send contingents. By the spring of 1812, Napoleon has assembled 685,000 men. It's the largest army Europe has ever seen. It's larger than the army that conquered Gaul. Larger than the army that crossed the Rubicon. Larger than anything Alexander the Great commanded. The logistics are staggering. 200,000 horses. 25,000 wagons. Portable ovens for baking bread. Mobile hospitals. Artillery trains with over 1,300 cannons. Supply depots are built along the border, stocked with food, ammunition, equipment. Napoleon studies maps, calculates distances, plans routes. He knows the risks. He's read about Charles XII of Sweden, who invaded Russia a century earlier and got destroyed. But Napoleon believes he's smarter, faster, better prepared. He believes he can force Alexander to fight and win before the Russian winter becomes a factor. June 24, 1812. The Grande Armée crosses the Neman River. The invasion begins. The soldiers march in good order, confident, singing. The summer heat is oppressive, but they've marched in heat before. The Polish civilians cheer as they pass. Liberators, they think. The French bands play. Napoleon rides with his staff, planning the next phase. Everything is going according to plan. Except the Russians aren't where they're supposed to be. The border forces, 2 Russian armies under Barclay de Tolly and Bagration, pull back before Napoleon can pin them down. He expects them to defend Vilnius. They abandon it. He expects them to defend the Dwina River. They retreat across it and keep going. Every time Napoleon gets close, they slip away. And they're burning everything. Every town, every village, every farm between Napoleon and the retreating Russians goes up in flames. It's a policy ordered from the top. Barclay knows he can't beat Napoleon in open battle, so he's going to bleed him dry instead. Starve him. Exhaust him. Make Russia itself the weapon. Napoleon is furious. His entire strategy depends on catching the Russians, beating them, and dictating peace. If they won't fight, the campaign drags on. And time is the one thing he doesn't have. Every day deeper into Russia is another day his supply lines stretch thinner. Every day marching through scorched territory is another day his men go hungry. The Grand Army starts suffering almost immediately. The heat is brutal. Soldiers collapse from heat stroke. The roads are dirt tracks that turn to mud when it rains. Wagons break axles. Horses go lame. Dysentery spreads through the ranks. Bad water, poor hygiene, no time to properly camp. Men start dying by the hundreds, then by the thousands. Not from battle. From disease, exhaustion, hunger. The supply system breaks down. The depots Napoleon built are too far behind. The wagons can't keep up with the pace of the march. Soldiers are supposed to be issued rations, bread, meat, wine. Instead, they get whatever they can scavenge. They slaughter livestock from abandoned farms. They raid root cellars. They eat unripe grain and get sicker. By the time the army reaches Vitebsk in late July, Napoleon has lost 150,000 men. 1/5 of his force. And he hasn't fought a single major battle. His marshals are worried. Davout, his best tactician, suggests stopping at Vitebsk. Consolidate. Wait until 1813. Invade again with fresh troops. Napoleon considers it. For a moment, he actually considers it. But then he looks at the map. Moscow is only 400 miles away. 400 miles. If he stops now, Alexander wins without fighting. The myth of Napoleonic invincibility dies. His enemies across Europe will smell weakness. So Napoleon orders the army forward. Smolensk is the next target, a major city, a strategic crossroads, a supply hub. If he takes Smolensk, he can force Alexander to react. The army marches. The Russians keep retreating. The temperature climbs into the high 90s Fahrenheit. More men collapse. More horses die. The column leaves a trail of bodies and abandoned equipment behind it. August 17, 1812. The French reach Smolensk. The Russians are there. Finally, a chance to fight. Napoleon orders an assault. The city is old, surrounded by thick medieval walls. The Russians defend fiercely. French artillery pounds the walls. Infantry storm the breaches. Street fighting erupts, brutal, close quarters, house to house. By nightfall, Smolensk is burning. The Russians withdraw across the Dnieper River under cover of darkness, destroying the bridges behind them. Napoleon stands in the ruins. Half the city is ash. The supplies he hoped to capture are gone, burned by the Russians before they left. He's won the battle but gained almost nothing. His marshals urge him to stop. Murat, his cavalry commander, argues they should dig in, fortify Smolensk, and spend the winter there. Napoleon refuses. Moscow is less than 250 miles away. The capital of Russia. The symbolic heart of the empire. He's convinced that if he takes Moscow, Alexander will have to negotiate. So the Grand Army marches again. Deeper into Russia. Farther from safety. The men are exhausted, hungry, sick. Discipline is fraying. Stragglers fall behind and are picked off by Cossacks. Entire regiments are shadows of their former strength. But they keep moving. Because Napoleon orders it. Because stopping means admitting failure. September 5, 1812. Scouts report that the Russians have stopped retreating. They're digging in at a village called Borodino, 70 miles west of Moscow. Kutuzov, the new Russian commander, has decided to make a stand. The Tsar demanded it. The Russian aristocracy demanded it. The people demanded it. Retreat can only go so far before it becomes cowardice. Napoleon is relieved. Finally, a battle. This is what he does best. He's won dozens of battles through maneuver, aggression, concentration of force at the decisive point. He studies the Russian positions. They're strong, anchored on high ground, fortified with earthworks, protected by artillery. Kutuzov has 120,000 men and 640 cannons. Napoleon has about 130,000 men and 587 cannons. It's close to even. This will be a slugging match. September 7, 1812. Dawn. The battle begins. Napoleon doesn't try anything fancy. No flanking maneuvers, no clever tricks. Just raw, frontal assault. Pound them with artillery. Send in the infantry. Break through. It's the only option when the enemy has chosen good defensive ground. The French artillery opens fire. Hundreds of cannons, firing in sequence, a rolling thunder that echoes for miles. The Russian positions disappear in smoke. Then the infantry goes in. Columns of French soldiers, bayonets fixed, marching uphill into the maelstrom. The Russians fire back, cannons loaded with canister shot, muskets by the thousands. Men fall in rows. The front ranks are torn apart. The next ranks step over the bodies and keep going. The main Russian fortifications, the flèches, 3 V-shaped earthworks on the left flank, become the focal point. French divisions attack. Russian divisions counterattack. The flèches change hands. French infantry take them. Russian infantry retake them. The fighting is hand-to-hand now. Bayonets, rifle butts, men grappling in the dirt. Artillery fires at point-blank range into the melee. Bodies pile up in the trenches. On the Russian right, the Great Redoubt, a massive earthwork fortification bristling with cannons, anchors the line. Napoleon orders Marshal Ney to take it. Ney's infantry charges. Russian guns tear them apart. They fall back, regroup, charge again. French cavalry, cuirassiers in steel breastplates, ride up the slope into cannon fire. Horses scream. Men are blown from their saddles. They keep coming. By midday, the Great Redoubt is surrounded. French artillery has been dragged forward, firing into the Russian guns at close range. Infantry storm the ramparts. The Russians defend with everything. bayonets, swords, cannon rammers used as clubs. Finally, the French break through. The great redoubt falls. Hundreds of dead lie inside, French and Russian bodies tangled together. But the Russians don't break. Kutuzov pulls his line back, reforms, holds. The French are exhausted. Napoleon has one card left, the Imperial Guard, his elite reserve, 20,000 of the best soldiers in the world. His marshals beg him to commit them, to smash through the Russian center and end this. Napoleon hesitates. If he loses the guard here, he has nothing left. He refuses. The battle grinds to a halt. By sunset, it's over. The Russians withdraw overnight, retreating toward Moscow. Napoleon holds the field. Technically, it's a French victory. But the cost is horrific. 30,000 French casualties. 40,000 Russian casualties. 70,000 men, dead or wounded, in 12 hours. It's the bloodiest single day of the Napoleonic Wars. And the Russians aren't destroyed. They're still an army. Still organized. Still dangerous. Napoleon won the battle, but he didn't win the war. He needed annihilation. He got attrition. And now, Moscow is open. But his army is shattered. September 14, 1812. Napoleon's army reaches Moscow. The men are exhausted, battered from Borodino, but they see the city ahead and hope flickers. Moscow, golden domes, sprawling streets, the ancient capital of Russia. Surely this means something. Surely Alexander will negotiate now. Surely the campaign is almost over. But Moscow is silent. Empty. The gates are open. No delegation comes to surrender the keys. No officials beg for mercy. The city has been evacuated. Governor Fyodor Rostophin ordered the civilians out, released the criminals from the prisons, and left. The French march into a ghost town. Napoleon enters the Kremlin, the massive fortress complex at the heart of the city. He stands in the throne room of the Tsars and waits for word from Alexander. Nothing. The silence is unnerving. This isn't how it's supposed to work. When you capture a nation's capital, they surrender. That's the rule. But Russia isn't following the rules. That night, fires break out. Small at first, a warehouse, a market building. Then more. Dozens of fires, spreading fast. The wind picks up. By morning, Moscow is burning out of control. 3/4 of the city goes up in flames. The wooden buildings, the centuries-old churches, the supply depots the French desperately need, all ash. Who started the fires? The French blame Rostophin. He left arsonists behind, they say, with orders to burn Moscow rather than let Napoleon have it intact. The Russians deny it, blaming French looting and carelessness. Historians still debate it. But the result is undeniable. Moscow, the prize Napoleon marched 1,000 miles to claim, is destroyed. Napoleon watches from the Kremlin as smoke rises across the city. He's trapped in the stone fortress while the inferno rages outside. For a moment, he considers fleeing, but the fires are everywhere. He waits it out. When the flames finally die, he surveys the wreckage. This is victory? Ruling over ashes? But he stays. He's come too far to turn back now. He sets up headquarters in the Kremlin and waits for Alexander to contact him. Days pass. Nothing. He sends letters, peace offers, generous terms, pleas for negotiation. No response. He sends envoys. They're turned away or ignored. Alexander won't talk. The Tsar has decided that any peace with Napoleon is worse than continuing the war. Weeks go by. September becomes October. The French army occupies the ruins of Moscow, scavenging for food, looting what's left, trying to rest. But the situation is deteriorating. There's no food coming in. The supply lines from France are too long, too vulnerable. The surrounding countryside has been stripped bare by scorched earth. Cossacks harass every French foraging party. Men sent to find food don't come back. Napoleon's generals are getting desperate. Marshal Berthier, his chief of staff, warns him they need to leave soon. Winter is coming. They're 500 miles deep in enemy territory. The army is weak, undersupplied, and shrinking every day from disease and desertion. Murat echoes the concern. Ney says it bluntly, "Get out now, or die here." Napoleon knows they're right. But admitting it means admitting the entire campaign was a failure. It means retreating without achieving any of his objectives. It means his enemies across Europe will see weakness and turn on him. He's paralyzed by pride and the hope that Alexander will blink first. October 13, 1812. A Russian raid hits the French outpost at Tarantino, south of Moscow. It's a sharp, aggressive attack. Kutuzov's army is getting bolder, testing the French defenses. Napoleon realizes the Russians aren't beaten. They're not going to negotiate. They're waiting for winter to finish the job they started. October 19, 1812. Napoleon finally gives the order. The Grande Armée will retreat. 100,000 men, that's all that's left of the 685,000 who crossed the Neman 4 months ago. They march out of Moscow in long columns, carrying whatever loot they've scavenged. Some men push carts loaded with silver, paintings, furs, valuables that will be worthless when the cold hits. Napoleon plans to retreat south, taking a different route back, through territory that hasn't been burned yet. But Kutuzov blocks the southern road with his army at Maloyaroslavets. The French attack, take the town, but Kutuzov's main force is still dug in. Napoleon looks at the situation, his exhausted, underfed army attacking a prepared Russian position, and decides it's not worth the cost. He turns north, back onto the same road they came in on. The road through Smolensk. The road that's already been picked clean. The road lined with corpses from the march to Moscow. The nightmare accelerates. The cold isn't brutal yet, just October chill, but it's enough. Men who don't have proper coats start shivering at night. Horses are dying from exhaustion and starvation. Without horses, the wagons can't move. Without wagons, the supplies run out even faster. Soldiers start abandoning their equipment. First the heavy packs, then the muskets, then anything that weighs them down. Discipline collapses. The Cossacks are everywhere. They don't attack the main columns, too dangerous. They wait for stragglers. A man falls behind to rest, to take a piss, to search for food, he disappears. Cossacks ride in, kill or capture him, strip the body, ride away. The French start traveling in tight groups, afraid to be alone even for a minute. Napoleon's army isn't an army anymore. It's a mob. Units mix together. Officers lose control. Men follow the mass of bodies ahead of them, hoping someone knows where they're going. The road is jammed with soldiers, camp followers, wagons, abandoned cannons. Progress slows to a crawl. Early November. The temperature drops. Not the apocalyptic cold yet, but cold enough to kill the weak. And everyone is weak now. Starvation has reduced proud soldiers to skeletons. Their uniforms hang off their bodies. Their eyes are sunken. They walk in a daze, one foot in front of the other, too exhausted to think about anything except survival. The French reach Smolensk on November 9th. It's been a French-occupied city since August, so there should be supplies, food, ammunition, medical care. The soldiers fantasize about it during the march. Hot meals. Warm shelter. Rest. They stumble into the city half dead, desperate. But Smolensk is a disaster. The supplies are inadequate, nowhere near enough for 100,000 men. The depots have been mismanaged, looted by earlier stragglers, or consumed by the garrison. The starving soldiers riot, breaking into warehouses, fighting each other over scraps. Officers try to restore order and fail. Men eat moldy bread and get sicker. Hundreds die in Smolensk from typhus, dysentery, starvation. After a few days, Napoleon orders the army to move again. Staying here means death. Moving might also mean death, but at least there's a chance. November 14th. The army leaves Smolensk. 50,000 soldiers, maybe less. Half the force that entered the city. The rest are dead, too sick to move, or deserted. The cold gets worse. -10 degrees Celsius. -20. The kind of cold that makes metal stick to your skin. The kind that freezes your breath in your lungs. Men start dying in huge numbers. Frostbite takes their fingers and toes first. Then their hands and feet. Then their lives. Soldiers sit down in the snow to rest and freeze to death before they can stand up again. The road becomes a nightmare, thousands of frozen corpses, piles of abandoned equipment, dead horses with chunks of meat hacked off their flanks. The surviving horses are skeletal, barely able to walk. When one collapses, men swarm it with knives and bayonets, cutting off pieces of flesh, sometimes before it's fully dead. They eat it raw because there's no time or energy to build fires. Some men drink the blood. Anything for calories. Anything to survive one more day. The artillery is abandoned. Napoleon's beloved cannons, the weapons that won him battles across Europe, left in the snow, barrels spiked so the Russians can't use them. But the Russians don't need to capture them. They just follow the retreating French and collect hundreds of guns. A fortune in bronze and iron, left behind because there are no horses to pull them and no men strong enough to drag them. The Imperial Guard, Napoleon's elite, the men who never broke, never ran, never surrendered, they're breaking now. Not from cowardice. From cold and hunger. They still march in formation, still protect the emperor, but they're ghosts. Their uniforms are rags. Their faces are blackened by frostbite. They look like corpses walking. Discipline is completely gone. Soldiers ignore orders. They throw away their weapons. They discard their packs. Officers can't control them. Marshals can barely control their own staffs. It's every man for himself. The only rule is survival. The Cossacks keep circling. They don't even need to attack anymore. They just wait for men to fall out of the column, then ride in and finish them off. Sometimes they take prisoners. The French fear that almost as much as freezing. Russian peasants, enraged by the invasion, by the burning of their villages, exact brutal revenge on captured Frenchmen. Stories spread, men tortured, buried alive, burned. Whether all the stories are true doesn't matter. The fear is real. Late November. The Berezina River. This is where it all comes to a head. The river should be frozen solid, crossable on foot. But there's been a thaw. The ice has broken up. The river is flowing, wide and freezing cold. And there's no bridge. 3 Russian armies are converging on the Berezina. Kutuzov from the east. Admiral Shishagov from the south. Wittgenstein from the north. They're trying to trap Napoleon, to destroy what's left of the Grande Armée, to capture the emperor himself. If the French can't cross the river, they're finished. Napoleon orders his engineers to build bridges. It's a desperate move. The engineers, men from the pontoon companies, already half dead from cold and exhaustion, wade into the freezing water. They're building 2 bridges, side by side, using timber torn from nearby buildings. Some of them die in the water, succumbing to hypothermia while they work. But they keep building. There's no choice. November 26, 1812. The bridges are finished. Narrow, shaky, barely holding together. The crossing begins. Infantry first, trying to maintain some order. Then cavalry, their horses slipping on the icy planks. Then the mass of stragglers, the walking wounded, the camp followers. Everyone desperate to get across. The Russians arrive. Artillery unlimbers on the east bank and opens fire. Shells slam into the bridges, into the riverbanks, into the packed masses of men. Bodies fall into the water. The river runs red. Men scream. Horses panic. The bridges sway under the weight. Marshal Ney and the rear guard hold the line on the east bank. They're outnumbered, outgunned, and freezing, but they fight. They buy time for the main body to cross. Ney is everywhere, directing cannon fire, rallying broken units, shooting Russians himself with a musket he picked up. His men worship him. They hold. November 28th. The pressure is unbearable. Thousands of stragglers are still on the east bank, crowding toward the bridges. The Russian artillery is relentless. The bridges are breaking under the weight. Engineers desperately make repairs, but it's not enough. November 29th. The order comes, burn the bridges. The rear guard has to cross now, or they'll be trapped. Ney pulls his men back, fighting every step. They cross under fire, the last French soldiers to make it. The engineers set the bridges on fire. Thousands of stragglers are still on the wrong side. They realize what's happening and rush the riverbank in panic. Some try to swim. The current takes them. The cold kills them in minutes. Some try to cross on broken ice. It gives way. They drown or freeze. The Cossacks ride in and slaughter those who remain on the bank. 10,000 men are lost at the Berezina. Maybe 15,000. Nobody knows the exact number. But Napoleon and the core of his army make it across. 40,000 men, maybe less, still capable of fighting. They keep moving west. The cold gets worse. December. -30 degrees Celsius. -40. Men die with every step. The column shrinks every day. Units that had 1,000 men have 100. Regiments vanish entirely. The Polish Corps, the Italian divisions, the Westphalians, gone. Dead or captured or scattered. Napoleon leaves. December 5th, he tells his marshals he's going back to Paris. He can't afford to be trapped with the slow-moving army. If he's captured or killed, his empire collapses. He needs to get back, raise new armies, hold the empire together. He puts Murat in command and rides west in a sleigh, escorted by a handful of guards. His men watch him go. Some call it abandonment. Others understand. Either way, Napoleon is gone. The retreat continues. The survivors stumble through Poland, through Prussia, heading for the safety of French-controlled territory. They don't look like soldiers anymore. They look like walking corpses. Their uniforms are rags. Their faces are black with frostbite. They shuffle forward in silence, too broken to speak. Late December, 1812. The remnants of the Grande Armée cross the Neman River, back into friendly territory. Fewer than 40,000 combat-capable soldiers make it. Out of 685,000. The rest are dead, captured, or so broken they'll never fight again. It's the worst military disaster in European history. And it's just the beginning of the end for Napoleon. Within a year, all of Europe will turn on him. The empire will crumble. The invincible emperor will be forced to abdicate. He'll escape from exile and fight again at Waterloo, but he'll lose. And he'll die alone on a remote island, a prisoner of the British, haunted by the frozen road from Moscow. But that's another story. This story ends here. In the snow. On the banks of the Neman. With 40,000 survivors and 645,000 ghosts.